Hello, I'm Gleason Olsen.
And I'm Eirik Olsen.
And we're co-founders of a global nonprofit called One Solution. And we're working diligently to inspire a shift in human consciousness so that we can more rapidly address the greatest challenges of our time. And the climate crisis is certainly one of those great challenges. In this conversation today, we wanted to kind of look at that challenge from perhaps a unique perspective. And I say unique because typically when we're talking about something like the climate crisis, people immediately go to all of the various external factors, like our food system, agriculture, energy, shifting to renewable energy sources, how we relate to nature, the material objects that we create and use and how we dispose of those things, what's ending up in landfills, what's ending up in oceans. So it's very typical and tempting for humans when we look at a big, hairy challenge like the climate crisis to immediately jump to everything that exists in the world out there that we have already created and go, how do we fix that? Or how do we innovate so we can do that better? But the angle that we like to look at is to start at, well, where does that begin? What is the source of everything that has been created out there? And we would say that that comes from the human mind or from a human state of consciousness. How we understand ourselves, our relationship to ourselves, and our relationship to everything in reality, other people, the natural world, existence. Because what we create is a reflection of how we understand our place in existence. So how people feel inside themselves directly ripples out into how they feel and treat everything outside of them. So for example, if I see myself as needing to protect myself because there is scarcity, or because I have learned that my accumulating my own success, my own wealth, my own protection of myself or my immediate family, I'm going to behave differently toward other people, toward others in my community, toward nature, because that's my fundamental operating platform for how I see the world and my mindset for how I approach everything that I do. Whereas if I see myself as a whole entity that's part of life, an interconnected piece in the puzzle called life, and that I only benefit my own peace of mind and my own well-being by benefiting the whole, then I'm going to act very differently toward this other being, this community, this wider world. So there has to be a change fundamentally in human consciousness, how we understand ourselves and how we understand our place in the natural world and the reality that we all coexist in, for anything in the world of creation to change, in what we make up, in the kinds of systems that we create and sustain and promote. So we like to get people of influence, people in communities, grassroots, top level, into a conversation about what needs to change inside ourselves, what needs to change in our minds, what needs to shift in our human consciousness to actually make this crisis go away, to make our relationship with the natural world sustainable, harmonious, and in the health of all things and all people and all beings.
And the biggest thing you can check in for yourself is if you've ever tried to change something about yourself, you know that no amount of information, no amount of guilt, no amount of doubt, no amount of feedback, no amount of external pressure or internal pressure will help you change until somehow, in some way, it shifts internally. That's the only way a human can change. That's the only way a group of people can change. That's the only way the world can change, is that if we want to have things change in the world, in the physical world, if we want to change system, if we want to change climate change, if we want to end conflict, it has to start with seeing that that is an internal process. It's an inner game. It's something that has to shift from within us. Because when we shift, we will literally have a different lens on the world. We will see a different world. And once we see a different world, we're much more easier able to create change. So if you've ever tried that as a person, you know, I can't make it happen. It has to shift. I can't push it. It has to shift. So the first point we're really interested in is just the fact of noticing that this has been an internally created world. Humans have imagined things and created them, and we live in the result of thousands of years of imagination and thousands of years of acting on that imagination. And I know it seems like it's really, really urgent. We got to fix what we have created. Mm-hmm. The biggest urgency is realizing that it has been created and how to recreate something. Because if we don't fix that, it doesn't matter how much we try fixing the outside, because the inner fundamental source of it hasn't changed. So we have to shift consciousness, we have to shift minds in order to shift the world. And the second thing is that, and you can check this in for yourself too, is that when we look out at the world, our human mind sees separate things. Mm-hmm. So you see me and you, us and them. You see, I live over here, you live over there. I look like this, you look like that. This is part of my life, this is part of somebody else's life. I'm part of this, you're part of that. I'm small, this bigger thing has nothing to do with me. So because we're set up to make it look like we are separate, we act because we act according to that vision. So when it looks separate, we deal with it as separate things. Mm-hmm. So you can even see in how we deal with problems. We deal with them as separate issues, as they're not really connected to each other. But we really think it's important to, again, go back to the source and see, like, where did all of these things come from? Not as separate issues, but all of them. And all of them started, again, internally and was projected out into the world.
And you see this in all different systems. You can see this in human biology and the body. You can see this with weather patterns with the entire earth. Like, we didn't know however many years ago that what happens in the rainforest in Brazil affects what happens in the deserts in Africa, because the planet is one enormous system that is interconnected. Same thing with the human body, but same thing with the human body as it pertains to nature. So we are connected to what's happening in nature. The quality of our air, we now know, affects our body. So it's much more leveraged to be looking for, how is this all interconnected, and how can we affect change in a way that honors the interconnectedness of all things? Because we are all interdependent. Nature and us are interdependent. So given that that is a now provable, visible fact, how do we address it as such? And as Eirik just said, it helps to see, well, what is the source of that? And certainly from a human perspective, the way that we can see the bigger picture and how it's all connected is seeing how human consciousness and our feeling in life relates to everything that we imagine and then create in our relationships between each other and the world. So we see the issue of climate crisis as just as much a part of social justice issues, just as much education issues, just as much criminal justice issues. These are all really one pulsating, interconnected body of symptoms. And, you know, to put it simply and perhaps a little bit bleak, it's sick. It's basically sick right now. We have a human immune system that lets us know when something is off, when there's a virus, and we need to shift something in order to heal. And if you see the entire climate crisis as one part of a larger body, you'll realize it is a single sickness that is connected to an entire immune system. So seeing that relationship between how humans feel and what they imagine and create in the world is an important component of what we need to work on when we're talking about the climate crisis. So when we do our work, we're working in all different places in the world, whether we're working with grassroots projects in Southside Chicago, we see that those things don't necessarily look interconnected when you see them as separate symptoms or separate issues, like what does gun violence have to do with climate change? But when you zoom out like we're talking about and see that everything affects everything else, it begins to look obvious that, oh, this is all part of one immune system. If we can help young people feel more agency in their lives, feel more connected to one another, they start to feel more connected to planet Earth. They start changing their behaviors toward each other, toward nature. Isn't that interesting? It's a social justice issue, it's a climate issue. It's a human issue, it's an earth issue. They're all one thing.
And the last thing we want to say is that this talk is all a part of the climate countdown. And some of us might be thinking, there's not enough time. We don't have time to look at the internal. We don't have time to look at the mind. We don't have time to really look at the source of things. We gotta fix what we have created. And we want to switch that on you guys and say, we don't have time to not look at that. We don't have time to not look at the mind. We don't have time to not look at what is actually perpetually creating these issues. Because if we don't change the source, we're not going to have a different result.